Good evening and welcome to our second hour with the Dean. We are really excited to have you here today as we discuss There is Power in the We, Black Youth's Journey Towards Collective Healing and Freedom. My name is Lenara Davidson Greenidge, and I have the honor of being the Associate Dean for Communication Strategy Development and Alumni Affairs here at the School of Social Work. And without further ado, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce you to our 18th Dean of the Columbia School of Social Work, Melissa Begg. Dean Begg.
Thanks so much, Lenara. I'm really excited to be here and excited for this event this evening. I'm going to jump right in because I know that's why you came. It is my great pleasure this evening to be hosting my colleague, Dr. Nkemka Anyiwo. Nkemka is a mother, artist, and youth advocate dedicated to supporting Black youth in cultivating loving and culturally affirmed realities where they can holistically thrive. Now, she applies a multi-method transdisciplinary approach to identify the cultural, communal, and contextual influences that shape how Black youth, one, make meaning of themselves and their society, and two, engage in practices to promote joy, social justice, and personal and collective wellness. Now, across this work, she engages media and creativity as tools to foreground the lived realities and voices of Black youth. Core to Dr. Anyiwo's work is the conviction that the brilliance and innovation of Black youth are essential to knowledge production and social transformation. She seeks to work in community with youth and the important figures in their lives to design research projects, policies, and programs that are grounded in developmental science, centering a holistic vision of Black humanity. Dr. Anyiwo earned her MSW and PhD in social work and developmental psychology at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And she also has a BA in psychology and African American studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Anyiwo, we are so lucky to have you on our faculty here at CSSW. Welcome. How are you feeling today?
Thank you. I feel great after that introduction.
Good. You should. I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. I loved describing your work just now. It's really unique and really special and important. So I'm glad we have an opportunity to have a chat here. So I want to learn more about it. So I'm going to just dive right in. So starting at the top, can you tell me more about your background and how that has shaped your work and your approach to your work?
Absolutely. So I am the child of Nigerian immigrants, and that's incredibly salient to my experience because when I think about what it means to be a Black person in America, I was raised by two people who were really trying to contend with Blackness themselves as they were trying to raise Black children in America. And so I think for me, early on, I had this kind of bicultural identity, or even more than bi, honestly, multicultural identity to an extent. I had my ethnic identity as being Nigerian. I had this racial identity as being Black, and never really fitting in either of the domains, feeling like I wasn't necessarily, I had different kind of cultural experiences and legacy in the United States than some of my Black peers. And yet I wasn't Nigerian enough at all to be Nigerian. So I think that experience contributed to a lot of exploration of me trying to figure out who I am, understanding my own perspectives. I was privileged enough to be in a lot of youth kind of development spaces where I got exposure to Black history, where I got exposure to kind of critical thought around social justice. And that became a mechanism for which I started to explore myself and get connected to, activism and what it means to be Black from a Pan-African perspective and what the uniqueness of Blackness is, as well as the unity pieces. So with all that being said, I think that as a young person who grappled with identity and struggled myself, even and seeing the implications of that on my academic outcomes, on my psychological outcomes, but seeing how my understanding of systems, the support from cultural spaces supported me, made me motivated to then want to work, and support the other Black youth who might be grappling with these identity challenges.
Wow. So it's personal. It's born of your experience, and I'm sure all the more authentic and better for it. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So I've, for a long time, been a huge proponent of interdisciplinary methods because I feel like the toughest challenges we face require nothing less if we're going to make headway on them. And you're facing, you are tackling some of the very toughest challenges we face as a society. And I know you also describe yourself as a transdisciplinary scholar. And so I wondered, I can imagine what that might mean to you, but I'd love to hear in your words what it means to you and why you think it's important to the kind of work that you do.
Absolutely. I think so. A lot of my work started in understanding history, understanding Black history, my own personal journey to understanding it, being an African-American studies major, and also just being a youth organizer, being in the streets working to advocate for racial justice and recognizing the importance of well-being in that process. And so when I decided I wanted to be a psychologist, I said, I can't really study the psychology and the well-being of Black kids without understanding our history. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not saying I need to pull from this discipline to do it, is that it's incomplete without a historical analysis. And even from the social work standpoint too, having the systems level analysis is so quintessential for me to even understand psychological concepts. And so I think the difference to me, it's not even really about the difference between interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, but in some ways, it's not that I'm pulling from these different disciplines to inform it. It's to say that I cannot even study or even understand these processes without having an integrative approach, And so that's what it means to me, is that if I'm studying Black children, how can I study Black children without that social political history, without understanding the triumphs and the trials, and the richness of the cultural legacy? How do I understand developmental processes of an individual while understanding systems and structures that shape those developmental processes? So I believe that we can't really fully understand the scope of any issue without having that approach. And just to add another piece, even from an organizing standpoint, if we're talking about how do we get free, right? How do we promote freedom for Black people? It doesn't happen through one discipline. It happens when it happens when social workers team up with lawyers and lawyers team up with artists. When we all come together and build coalitions, that's how we get free, because we approach things from these different perspectives. And so I think both me as a scholar, but also when I think about myself as an advocate and a lover for the people, I think about that in terms of, pulling from taking all the family members together, to help address issues, and to not just issues, but also to amplify the beauty that is happening.
Yeah, it's really rich. Thank you for that. So you do a lot of challenging work, and I'm thinking about the overall mission and purpose and sort of North Star of what you're doing. When you think about that mission and the North Star that guides you, what comes to mind?
I appreciate that question. I think that's something that's important for me to think about constantly, because I feel like when we think about the systems that we encounter and how pervasive those systems are, it can be quite daunting. But I think, so when I think about the mission of the work, a lot of the mission is about amplifying the voices of Black youth. It kind of, in many ways, is inspired by the Black Panthers, like this idea of self-determination. What does it look like for Black youth to be able to control their destiny? To envision freedom and envision spaces where they thrive and, create their futures. And how do we, as allies to youth, support that and create the conditions for them to have the power to control their destiny and create the realities that will allow them to thrive.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So you're mentioning there the journeys of Black youth, I think. And can you say more about your understanding of their journeys and how you conceptualize that?
Yeah. So one, I'm duly trained as a psychologist and social worker, but so the developmental part of me is like, I'm always thinking about trajectory and time. But I think one of the things that's powerful, I think, about the word journey is that it also gives, again, agency. It foregrounds the person who's moving through it. Sometimes I think when we think about development, we think about this like almost as if it's not real people. It's just like this actor or this like being that is influenced by all these things and it shapes them. But I'm like, when I think about our young people, I think of them on a path, and they move and they navigate these different paths, but they are a part of them. They're actively engaged in moving in that path. And it's also that the journey is not just created by the individual, that they're moving forward in ways from the legacy of their ancestors, and then they're setting the trajectory for the future generation. So there's like an intergenerational component of how I think about the work with young people, that really centers them actively moving and not just being recipients of the outside system.
Yeah. And you're a mom too, right? It was the first thing I said about you. So that this has to have a lot of resonance for that too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot.
Daughter. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And as I'm thinking about journey, I'm like, I don't know, tossing around in my head too, journey and destination. And, some people, the destination doesn't matter. It's the journey. How would you react to something like that?
That's a great question. I think both and I believe in that to an extent. I think the process matters, right? Like we grow so much through the process. And sometimes, it could be, the outcome could be, disheartening, but even what we learn through the process could be beautiful, and then other times we have a beautiful outcome, but to get there was a struggle, right? And so I feel like we have to kind of honor both what's the process across the journey as well as where we end.
Yeah. That's a good point. And as you said, the work can be really daunting, and it's massive, right? Given the state of our society and how systemic racism is so pervasive. So you need to take inspiration from somewhere as you move along. So who inspires you? What sorts of things have inspired you to stay on your journey to do this work?
It's funny because I usually think about like artists and as a motivator, but when you ask right now, the first thing I thought about was my mother.
Really?
And it just came up. I think my mom. A part of what inspires me about my mother is just like her tenacity. I think a lot of times when immigrants come to this country, she had to start over basically, and build a whole career while raising 4 children and dealing with a whole new social political landscape. My mother and my father, both of them also grew up in, part of their childhood in war, so like, what does that look like to like overcome all, it's like they live so many lives within in one life. So I'm inspired by, even when I think about like Black youth and legacy, right? Like even reflecting on my own legacy and seeing how that has manifested for my mom and how gender and race kind of play a role to how she navigates the system is inspiring. But another piece would definitely be the creativity piece. So Black artists are a huge inspiration for my research, honestly. Thinking about Common and Common, a rapper, is a song for Assata. That's how I learned about Assata Shakur, a Black Panther who, who's exiled in Cuba right now, and just the power of storytelling through the creative. And how like, it's like my role as an academic in many ways is to be a storyteller for my people, is to understand what we go through, to figure out ways to investigate it in a beautiful way, but also to document it, in ways that, other folks may not have access to document it. And so just honoring the beauty of how artists have been so instrumental in social movements and inspiring and uplifting communities, and like thinking about how I can serve in that role as an academic through innovative and creative ways, to make sure that it's not just speaking to an academic audience, but also thinking about how to translate that work in a way that is accessible to communities.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. One of the things, you're early on in your career, I'm at the other end. And I think a lot about the different phases of my own career and the evolution. And one of the reasons I'm really grateful to be in social work right now is because it's so values driven, the kind of work that goes on here. So I want to ask you, how would you describe the values that shape your work and push you forward?
I think there's one value that comes to mind
Yeah.
immediately, and that is Ubuntu, which translates to I am because we are. So
That's great.
recognizing like I talked about that. You probably gonna hear me say this like a million times today, but legacy
That's good.
and
Yep.
you know, generations, and so
Yeah.
I think that value is actually probably the quintessential value that guides the work, because it's like, what does it look like? I am because of all those who came before me, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I am because of those who will come after me. I am because of those who are here now, you know, and so
Yeah.
how do I show up to the work honoring all of those pieces that make me?
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. That's great. Thank you. Um, and here we are. You work at, I mean, what's really clear about your work is that you are definitely engaged with Black youth and with communities in a very deep and meaningful way. I mean, a lot of people say it, and your work really just redolent with it. So I'm thinking about how do your values help you to navigate both academic spaces and community spaces as that can be challenging at times, I imagine.
Definitely, absolutely. I mean, I think from the academic standpoint, it's about how to ensure that the community is present, given that they are who I am and I am who they are, right? And so, and what does it mean to be present in a tangible, realistic, meaningful way?
Yeah.
So to me, a part of it is like uplifting a Black youth voice in the process.
Yep.
And that's something that I'm still growing in. I want to just also honor that too. You know, like I'm still, as you mentioned, early in my career. And so there's ways that I've engaged Black youth in the work, you know, like doing youth participatory action type projects where young people are creating research questions. But in the future, I want to really amplify young people's voices in a different way, and really center their voices in the process. Because I think about like what does it mean to build a science on youth that is guided by youth? You know, it's not just adults imposing what we think. So I think that matters a lot in terms of the work. And even, you know, recently when I've been connecting with some beautiful organization called HALA in New York, and they're also reminding me of the importance of including elders in the conversation. So recognizing like this, again, having these intergenerational conversations about how communities can thrive, which, you know, is powerful, and it goes, it's full circle. It's like, what can we learn from the elders? What can the elders learn from the youth? Right? Like, and how do we as scholars learn from that dynamic process? So that's how I think that idea of Ubuntu kind of translates into my work.
Yeah. Yeah. I could just hear such strains of that social work core in your response, and how that's just coming through in everything that you do and you talk about. So that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this community-based collaborative work takes a lot of different forms. And I think you kind of touched on this, but could you say a little bit more about why that's essential to the work that you're doing, and to I'm going to guess the ultimate impact that you're hoping to have?
Yeah. You know, I think, and I probably said this in this conversation about translating research, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know, I hesitate sometimes to even use that language, because it's like, if we create the research with the community, then it doesn't need to be translated, right? Is that the community creates the languages with us, and you know, and so I think going back to the mission work, I think I'm uniquely positioned to be in the academy. And by that, I mean that my path, my journey has brought me here for a reason. And there's certain skills that I have here. And there's certain powerful skills and insight that community has. And the way in which we can use research in a tangible way to actually address social issues and to amplify cultural assets. And I'm saying that on purpose too, because I'm like, I find myself also kind of leaning into the issues. And I'm like, but there's so much beauty that we don't talk about enough, you know? But in the sometimes people, you know, the field, not our field specifically, but science in general, that we come
academia in general, right? Yeah.
Academia in general is it's about addressing an issue. And it's like, well, what does it look like to even see the beauty of what's happening, right? And I think that when we engage community, we don't have to translate, because they're present. And there's a breadth, of through which we look at the work, because we have insight for people who are directly on the ground doing the work and living those experiences.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. So as you get up every morning to do this job you've taken on, what are you most excited about for the research that you're doing presently?
That's
a lot, I'll bet. Yeah.
I think I'm the most excited about writing with young people. Hopefully that's a goal. Like I would love to write some of these academic papers with them, and then also think of and then using creative outlets for the work. So recently I did a song with one of my research findings. And so that was cool. It was fun I've been struggling with okay, how much of my artist identity do I integrate into my scholarly identity? But it's well, how do my people communicate? And especially as a Nigerian, we speak in proverbs. People will insult you in proverbs. They'll joke with you in proverbs. You learn lessons through proverbs. And I'm the creative is such a powerful, important part of the way in which people of African ancestry communicate, share stories. And so it was really beautiful to have an opportunity to write a song, to translate research findings, and think about different venues so that we can write the academic paper and then think about a way to present it in a way that's more accessible and in alignment with what people, would receive. So yeah, that was exciting. And I look forward to doing more of that.
That's great, because I can just see how, when it comes to the dissemination portion, which can be a big challenge, I think, for academics in terms of reach and collaboration with communities. But this is a fantastic and ingenious way to promote that, I think, and move it forward. So talented person. So that's great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing that. So, I can imagine you doing that. So that's excellent. Every task, every project we undertake brings unique challenges to it. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges you've faced in taking up this work.
Yeah. So there are a couple things that come to mind. Yeah. One big challenge is, I mentioned before, being a storyteller and the importance of telling our stories. And I think that I've come into a deeper realization about what that looks like as an academic than I did in the past. So one of the tensions, I think, is wanting to document our stories and do good work, but not wanting to be opportunist in how I do that. And I think a good example of that was in my postdoc. We had a pandemic, we had a racial uprising, and I had designed a study about how kids think of how Black youth think about race, how they conceptualize racism, how they think it affects them, what kind of actions they engage in. And in some ways, it's oh, this is what I've already studied. This is a perfect time to do this work because there's a racial uprising. And on another end, I'm our kids are suffering though, right? They're dealing with a lot of stress right now. School is closed. They're stuck in the house. They're dealing with all kinds of issues. They're also distressed by the public lynching of a Black man, distressed by, all the other, Black men, Black women, Black children, trans individuals that are being killed, who you can literally see visual representations of Black death. And so I think I had to navigate too, what is ethical? What does it look like? And so I'm still navigating that, because again, I think a part of it is understanding how we feel is important, and amplifying voice is important. And so being able to document that moment is important. But it's how do we do it in a way that honors the humanity of our young people, and cares for them as well, versus being I'm going to ask you these questions and leave. And so I think I want to be intentional throughout my research about how to do the work in a way that's ethical, and not just ethical based on university kind of
standard,
but
ethical research,
but caring for the people in a real tangible way.
Yeah, the compassion and the human relationship sounds like it's front and center in what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you just mentioned, caring for the youth you work with. How do you care for yourself in all of this. Studying racism is incredibly difficult, and it's got to have a lot of layers. And I'm wondering how you make sure you're okay as you do this.
Yeah, I'm on a journey to figure that out. A part of it is, honestly, it's taking pauses and honoring where I'm at, like being in touch with my emotions, being in touch with my body. And one of the most beautiful things that has been supportive of me is working in community with folks that, like, in community, I mean, like, with my working in collaboration with my friends, talking to them, about how I feel, tapping into I have 2 friends where sometimes we start working sessions like with grounding. We start with grounding ourselves, doing check-ins before we get into any of the academic work. And I think creating a culture of that is beautiful. And also just turning things off. There's times where things happen and I don't engage. I definitely don't watch videos of Black death. I don't do that to myself because I'm also I'm a very sensitive being, you have to honor yourself, and so I don't watch those videos. I did at one point in my life, but I also found myself getting so cold, to these kind of images and getting cold to these kind of news in a way that was detrimental. So turning things off sometimes and disengaging and protecting myself in that way is important.
Yeah. That's a good message for, I think, your colleagues and students who might be tuning in and listening to you. It's a really important message. I want to ask you about something that it was an event last week where you and several of our colleagues engaged in a panel discussion about your work, and it was centering Black joy, and which I thought was a beautiful theme. But it was really great to see you in that setting, and there were community members there, which doesn't happen all that often. It should happen more often in our environment, and I'll make a note of that for myself. But I just wondered if you could comment a little bit about what that meant to you, or what that it was really special for those of us watching it. I'm wondering what it was like for you participating in it.
It was beautiful, genuinely beautiful. I think a lot of my colleagues and I often want our work to matter in a real way. And I think that, one, it was beautiful to have community show up and feel connected to the title and connected to what we do. And then secondly, it was beautiful to learn and engage in that kind of reciprocal conversation. I think it was a healing session. We healed together in that session. There was that raw transparency about the pain that we experienced, and I felt like it was beautiful to engage in that conversation where we could both honor our humanity, both as me as a scholar, community members as active participants in healing. And we were talking about an educator and someone who owned a nonprofit, and just from these different sectors of life. It was beautiful, and it's honestly what I seek the academy to look like. Is that it is not a top-down approach. It's not a place that is inaccessible. It's a place where we engage directly with our community. Because even that piece, I would often talk about collaborating with community, but I'm like, then who am I? Am I not in the community? I am. I'm a member. I live here, right? And so what does it look like for me to be to not just think of community as distal, but you might be teaching my kid, and what does it look like for us all to work together in this ecosystem to move towards the things that we need to move towards in order to see to create the world that we hope to have.
Yeah. There's something else that you said. Thank you for that. And it was beautiful in every regard. Thank you for your courage and sharing in that. One other thing that's running around in my head as I'm listening to you, you're talking about storytelling, and I think that's so important. And of course, as a researcher, you use data too, and I think data is a tool for social justice and both quant and qual. And I'm just wondering how you weave those things together. Does that resonate with you? I don't know. I've just been spending a lot of time thinking about that myself, and I wonder how it lands with you when we think about that.
Yeah. So just to clarify, are you meaning using interdisciplinary? I mean, using multi-methods or
the multi-methods. And the translate. Yeah, maybe more the translation to stories, because I think that's where we can really amplify impact, right? And
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm thinking through that more. I think, part of it is, what does it look like to write from your real voice, and write in not in a sterile way of a lot of academics use passive voice, even just as simple as
this was done, this was completed. Yes.
But what does it look like to speak and write authentically, also even just language, I'm like, how much convoluted language is used as we tell these stories. But I'm hearing you say a bigger question that I'm not tapping into, which is what story does the data tell us, and how do we use the data to tell a story? And a part of it is I have a colleague I've seen people who write poems to disseminate their quality, not to disseminate as in the paper. I mean, one of my colleagues, my sister, Christina Morton, she did a qualitative study on Black women in STEM and wrote poems, and it's not like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm going to write this academic paper, then I'm going to write the poem. No, the academic paper was creative, included art into it. And I'm like, that's the kind of work that I think is powerful. And do we honor that? As true science, or, as rigorous enough. But to have the boldness to write an academic paper that is art, as a way to tell the stories, I think is something that I'm really inspired by folks who are doing that.
Yeah, that's bold. It is bold.
Yes.
That's very, very exciting. One of our faculty colleagues sent me a poem recently that her class had crafted about, social work and the mission. And it was really beautiful. So I'm glad to see that's becoming a way to express this, to express the mission. And as you're saying, pushing it into the research realm too, I think is fascinating. Shortly, we're getting some great audience questions in, so I'm going to turn to those in a second. But one thing I would like to ask you, since we've had this opportunity to hear about your really exciting work, it's so impressive. But if, as we think about the work that you're doing, is it possible for you to boil down to 3 points that you would want us as the audience members to take away today regarding the research that you're conducting?
Yeah. So I think one point would be that Black people are not just oppressed beings, are not just passively oppressed beings. They're healing, they're thriving and resisting, right? They're existing and resisting and thriving. And even to add that, we don't just resist, right? Because sometimes it's in the effort of us. This is not even clean. I'm just being honest. I'm good. I have some points, but I'm also let me just be free spirited right now.
Please. Yeah. Do it.
So even that, we don't also just exist to resist. I think sometimes in this, sometimes I believe in resistance. I believe in transformation, but I also think that we're also just people. We're just beings. One of these days, someone said something about radical rest, and I believe in radical rest, and I believe in rest as resistance. But I'm my rest and my joy isn't only resistance. It is, some of it is, but some of it is just me being. So what does it look like for us to understand Black youth as just being, right? And honor those pieces of them. And then I think the third piece is the importance of amplifying our young people's voices in a real tangible way. Recognizing that I've learned some of the best, beautiful lessons from young people. Yeah. Even when I reflect on myself as a young person, I'm like, dang, I was deep, and that's not to toot my own horn or anything like that. It's to say that me in my 30s is learning.
You're surprised at what
I'm learning from. I learned from 17-year-old me, and so there's a beauty in the innovation and the free spiritness of young people who can just walk in this beautiful creativity and that's unhampered by these false senses of how we must move and how we must act. Yeah. I think that young people have the capacity to think deeper and think creatively because they're not as constricted. They haven't been socially conditioned to be as constricted. So what does it look like?
We haven't dragged that out of them yet, right?
Yes, stripped it out, right?
Yeah.
So it is important. It's so important. And then not just in a research setting, in our clinical settings, in our policy settings, to really provide spaces for youth to have real tangible voices, and not just like, we're going to have this youth rep, you know? It's like, what does it mean for them to actually have the ability to make decisions, to be valued as equal members of society?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing mission. And it's really uniquely you. I mean, I know other people do it, but it's just so clear that it's central to your core, I think, your core being. So that's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Well, we're getting some terrific questions in, both from some colleagues, and I see some names of some CSSW alums, so it's fun to see that. But let me share some of those with you. So one colleague asked, such an honor to hear from you tonight, Dr. Anyiwo. I loved what you shared about where your inspiration comes from and how it influences your work. Can you speak more to how you, here's that word translate again. Do we need that word? How do you translate the academic work in accessible and meaningful ways with communities? And how do you use of self in this process? So as you think about that, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so I'm going back to that song only because it was a huge stretch for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm like, oh, I don't want to share my my art, you know. But it is me, right? Like when I think about it on a spiritual level, I think that my spirit speaks through the art, you know. And I think that so that this is to answer the second part of that question in terms of what does it look like to translate the work in accessible ways. I think the music can be a powerful, accessible way. And I think in that song, I essentially like describe youth organizers pulling from messages they hear about race from their parents to inform how they navigate racism and how they navigate, how they engage in resistance. And a part of that is me, right? Like a part of it is what messages did I hear from the elders in my community, you know? So as I'm trying to tap into the voices of the young people, I'm like reminding myself of my voice. Some of it is like the young people who I've seen, who I've had the pleasure and blessing of being in organizing spaces with, and like how they conceptualize and think about the work. So I think one of my mentors talked about remembering the humans, like remember the heartbeats is what she said. Remember the people who care about as you do the work. And that is a reminder. It's like, how do I do this work in a way that my mom could understand it? You know, how do I do this work the way that my mentor in middle school, you know, would not only understand it, because not only would he understand it, but he does it. He taught me it, right? But how do I do it in a way that like would speak to him and would you know, amplify him? And then I think so that's that piece. And then when it comes to like there was something about, was that the question? Did I answer the question?
Yeah, and there was something about use of self, which I think you're talking about your spirit and your artistic.
Yes, I think just honoring my whole self is something that's important. And I'm a spiritual being. I think there's spiritual pieces to the work that I do, a divine piece to it. And I have to honor that. I'm a creative being, and I believe that my ancestors appreciate the creative because they used it, you know.
Something we all share, right? Across those generations. Yeah.
So what does it look like to honor that piece of me and my legacy as something that I would like to continue to interrogate for myself?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Another colleague asks, you know, you arrived here last July 1, right? Officially. So you're going to be celebrating your 1-year anniversary before we know it. And so thinking about that 1 year at CSSW, what have been some highlights so far in joining this community?
Yeah, I would say.
Or surprises, anything memorable, whatever you want to. Yeah.
The fact that you called it a community is the highlight, right? Like, I think it is a community, genuinely. And a lot of places aren't like that. The event that you mentioned on Monday, you were there. Our dean came to the event. The assistant dean came to the event. People from admissions came to the event, right? Like, I love how communal the School of Social Work is, how they show up in real loving ways, and how much people are truly invested in your success, even if they don't do the work that you do. I think there's a deep honoring of each other's work in a beautiful way. And that inspires me.
No, that was our honor to be there and witness that. That was really, really very special, and love that you're bringing that community spirit and amplifying it here. Thank you. A question from one of our alums: what areas are really important where we could better support youth? Do you think, based on all the work that you're doing?
A lot of people do really beautiful work on mental health, and I think we need to continue to do that work. I was just talking to one of our colleagues about that at our lunch, the community lunch that we had today. They mentioned about a lot of the struggles that a lot of our young people are having around the pandemic was challenging and is, and so I think we need to continue to hone in on mental health. But it goes back to like asking the young people what they need, really amplifying young people's voices. I remember I had there were young people in a conversation, and they were talking about how sometimes the adults in their lives minimize like mental health issues and mental health challenges because they're socialized to believe we should just get over it, or we should be strong enough to handle it. And so like, how are young people navigating those kind of messages? How are they understanding what it means to care for themselves? And how can we amplify what they're doing that's successful to care for themselves and provide resources and support for them to do that work? And then also, how do we take away some of that stress of the things that they feel like they have to hold? But the mental health piece just comes to mind because I'm seeing alarming statistics in suicide attempts and ideation and all kinds of harm for our young people. And I just think that we need to continue to hone in on that and be very, very, very intentional about, vigilant to an extent about understanding, making sure that they're good.
Yeah. That's a great answer. Thank you. Big issue for our country. We have another question here that highlights, you've spoken a lot about being a really collaborative scholar and collaborative partner in the work that you do. And I also noticed you use the word coalition, which I think is really important, right? And so this question comes, how do we get more individuals and organizations to invest in support for youth development and youth wellness? Do you think that's an issue, or are there ways we can help move that forward, do you think?
I think there's so many beautiful organizations that are doing amazing work in the city. I think there's so many folks that are doing such beautiful work and supporting the young people. So I think a part of it is, how do we leverage the knowledge of the folks who are on the ground doing that work and work with corporations, with media, with kind of these kind of bigger, I guess, figures. I don't know what the best word for those folks are, government agencies, to learn those models and integrating youth voice. I think that's what comes to mind to me, because I'm like, there's folks that are doing great work, a lot of folks that are doing great work, but it's like, how do we amplify their work? How do we provide, like being intentional about finding resources for them, and then working with folks who make change, who create the ideologies in society. Media plays a substantial role in creating how we think about things. What does it look like to have youth voice in media? What does it look like to have youth voice in Congress in a real tangible way? Right. So I think learning from the models of folks who are doing excellent work already and bringing those models into other sectors.
Yeah. I remember, I don't know why I saw this, but I saw it in the paper at some point when Carolyn Maloney was in Congress. She had a youth advisory council, which I thought was a great idea. So she would bring them in periodically throughout the year. And I think it sounds like you're a proponent of that. You're actually doing that in very real ways. So thank you. And any ideas on how to promote intergenerational connections, since that appears to be really important to you, and how do you think about that?
How to promote intergenerational connections?
To add value specifically to community processes. So that's the full question. I think it's a good question.
That's a beautiful question. And you know what? That's something I would like to explore more empirically. Like what does it look like for us to like empirically study the process of intergenerational conversations?
Yeah.
The ways it's looked like for me in the past has been like, the young people I was working with one setting where like, we want to have a conversation around mental health. And they're like, but we want to talk to, we want to have it. They essentially said they wanted to have an intergenerational conversation. So what does it look like to engage adult allies to support that process, and like, think about ways for us to come with the humility as adult, to learn from the young people. And like, there's a proverb, and I'm gonna mess it up, so I don't want to say it. There's a proverb that comes.
We'll get it later. Yeah.
the key thing about the proverb, if my husband was here or my father was here, they would be able to say it well. But the key thing about the proverb is that like young people move too fast and like don't heed the knowledge of the elders, and elders, neglect the knowledge of the young people. So like, I think a part of it is us coming with humility, especially the adults. Honestly, it's really the adults. The kids come with humility because they forced to an extent because of social norms. But what does it look like for the adults that really come with humility and say, I can learn from this 17-year-old, or I can learn from this 10-year-old, or I can learn from my 17-month-old daughter, right? What does it look like to like genuinely believe that, not just do that performatively? Like, oh, let's do this council, or let's have the kids talk and say what they want and not listen to them. Like, what does it mean to really have the humility to recognize and amplify the brilliance of our young people so that we can have a real intergenerational conversation? I think that's key.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Really well said. There was a question submitted ahead of time that kind of asks about, the way I'm reading it is, it's how would you define social transformation? When you use that term, if you use that term, you're talking about within person, across people. What does social transformation mean to you in your work?
I think that a lot, this is might be unconventional, but I think it comes in the hearts. I think we think about social transformation often as policy changes, and I think the policies have to change and the systems have to change. Yeah. But a part of the ways the systems change is what we believe wholeheartedly, the ideologies, the thoughts, and so I think that real social transformation is shifting our ideologies, shifting how we think, being compassionate and feeling and deeply connecting to the ideas of justice so that we can then build real systems. That's another piece to me that's important. It's like there's dismantling systems and then there's building systems. Yeah. And sometimes some people are geared towards dismantling. I tend to be in my work really geared towards building. And I believe in building even when systems aren't dismantled. Like what does it look like for us to create alternative systems? Because sometimes these systems they take a long time. They will take a long time to shift. So what does it look like when gaps are there, when things are not moving in the way they're supposed to? What does it look like to create alternative systems to get to get needs met, to be well, right? So that's slightly all over the place, but I think in some it's the heart and it's the creation of systems.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of opening a door there, right? Because a lot of folks in social work do talk about dismantling and building, and I think you're saying we don't have to wait for everything to be dismantled. There's still stuff that needs to be dismantled, yet we can be building at the same time. I think that's an interesting construct to think about. So thank you. Another student asked about compassion in all of this. Do you think compassion is key?
Absolutely. Compassion is so important. It's important for so many reasons. It's important for us as an individual. Yeah. Because can you have compassion for others if you don't have self-compassion? No. Like, well, yeah. What if I can't care for myself and I don't even honor my own pain? What does it look like to honor the pain of others, right? So I think it is the quintessential aspect of anything around social justice, around progression, is one, learning how to have compassion for ourselves, and then learning how to extend that compassion to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. And one last question before we wrap up, Nkemka. is another of our colleagues, thanks you for a thought-provoking presentation, and wonders if there's a poem or anything you would like to share in this moment. So you referred to a song. Is there something you would want to share now or point us to that we can look at later? Because that's really intriguing and exciting that you're using those forms of expression. Where can we see more of that?
Yeah, I can absolutely share a link. I could share a little tiny bit.
Yeah, do it. We'd love
see
it.
If I can feel confident. Okay, I'm going to try. I'm not going to go off the top. I'm going to try
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for that question, whoever asked that. Okay, so for the song, the chorus of the song is, Mama taught me how to keep my pride and stay woke. Daddy taught me never let them take me for a joke. I'll never forget that they taught me how to cope. They raised me to resist and to never give up hope. Mama taught me how to keep my pride and stay woke. Daddy taught me never let them take me for a joke. I'll never forget how they taught me how to cope. They raised me to resist and to never give up hope. So that's the sampler. And then I'm happy to share the link so that folks can check out the whole song. I know that wasn't a lot, but
No, that was beautiful. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much for being willing to share that with us. It's really special. Everybody's now is charming and amazing. Thank you. Really, yeah, you've hit a chord there for sure. Anything you'd like to say as we wrap up? This has been such a fun conversation, and I feel like I know you well already, but I feel like I know you better after these. So I love doing these conversations and learning more about really what makes folks tick and pushes them to do the really hard work that you do every day and with such grace and beauty. So thank you. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Nkemka, at this point?
Well, I just want to say I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really grateful to even have this conversation and to think through why this work matters in a real way. Grateful to engage with our alum and learn from our alum. I hope to have opportunities to connect with folks more in the future. But I think the only thing that's on my heart is gratitude.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. We're grateful for you. And I just, as I was listening to you, I just was jotting down certain things that are going to stay with me. So honoring both the journey and the destination, and Ubuntu, am I saying right? Ubuntu, that I am because we are.
Yes.
That's really wonderful. Remember the heartbeats. When is translation even necessary is another one, right? Depending on how we approach this work. So I want to thank you for all of those, because I'm going to carry those forward too. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's fun to get together, and we really appreciate that everyone has been here and to get a firsthand look at what you are doing, Dr. Anyiwo, and how important it is, and the unique approaches that you bring to it and perspectives based on your life. So thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it too.
Yeah, this is great. All right. Thanks, everybody. It was a great session.